Hello, and welcome to today's Commonwealth Club World Affairs program. I'm Dustin Gardner, co-author of Politico's California Playbook. And now let me tell you a little bit about our speaker before he comes out here. Matt Mahan grew up in Watsonville on the Central Coast in a working class family. He went to school at Harvard, and after college, he was a middle school teacher for Teach for America. In 2020, he was elected to the San Jose City Council, and he's now in his second term as mayor after he was elected. He was reelected in a landslide in 2024. So please join me in welcoming Mayor Matt Mahan to the stage.
Dustin,
good to see you.
How are you? Good to see you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks so much for doing this. Let's, I guess, before we get into all the policy and all the things about your campaign, I feel like we just kind of got to talk about the elephant in the room of the news of the last week with Eric Swalwell, the congressman dropping out of this race and resigning from Congress following sexual abuse allegations. What about this episode speaks to you in terms of changes that need to happen within the party or within the political arena?
Yeah, I mean, first, I just want to say I think the women who spoke up are incredibly courageous and need to be protected and respected. I think far too often women don't speak up because they think that they won't be believed or that their reputations and careers will be ruined as a result of just being honest. And we shouldn't protect people in power. We all should be accountable, and that's really the key here. I think the fact that Eric Swalwell went as far as he did for as long as he did and very quite possibly could have become our next governor is symptomatic of a political system that's very broken, that rewards ego and celebrity and insider politics over results and accountability. And I think it just speaks to part of the purpose of my campaign and my drive is to make government more transparent and accountable and really focus on the outcomes that matter in people's lives. And I think that's the change that we need right now within the Democratic Party, within California, within the country. I mean, look at our president. Talk about someone who has continued to accumulate power and wealth while representing so many of the worst values, and it's that lack of accountability for ethics and for really making people's lives better that's part of what's broken in our politics. And I think we've got to not just fall into our hyper-partisan silos, but actually demand ethical leadership from all of our elected officials.
And you've had a big week as the race has been upended by all of this, but how do you think this fundamentally changes your standing in this race for governor?
Well, Dustin, I think the race already was wide open, but is even more so now. And perhaps ironically, this horrific news about these allegations against Eric Swalwell have actually put more of a focus on this race than there has been up until now. People are just starting to tune in. Californians are busy, getting their kids to school, working a job or two to pay the rent. We're just starting to have a conversation in this race, the conversation we need to have about each of our ideas and our track record for making California work better for working families, getting back to our core as a state, which is a place that's aspirational, that's inventing the future, that's welcoming people from all over the world and creating opportunity and upward mobility for everyone. That's the conversation we need to be having, and I'm excited to be in this race to drive that conversation.
Let's shift gears and talk about policy. You've been one of the most outspoken people in this race on the Democratic side in terms of opposing this proposed billionaires tax. Tom Steyer, a potential front runner now, has been more supportive, probably the most supportive in the race. What about the idea of a wealth tax, a one-time assets tax, is so concerning to you in terms of the state's economy?
Well, what concerns me is what it will do to middle class and working people, which is my guiding light in my public service and my life. I want to create more opportunity for people. And here's the reality. We should have a progressive tax code. We should be concerned about economic inequality and make sure we're creating more opportunity, better schools, more affordable housing, reducing barriers to building small businesses, all the things that enable prosperity and upward mobility. Wealthy individuals should not be able to use the tax code to avoid paying their fair share. I've called for closing a loophole that allows extremely wealthy people to endlessly borrow against their stock options and other assets as a way to avoid paying capital gains. That's wrong. We should close that loophole. But the problem with a wealth tax is that what we see is capital flight. We've seen this. In the last 6 months, California's lost over $1 trillion. Our future revenues are now lower just because of this proposal. And we're not unique. 12 European countries have implemented wealth taxes. 9 of them have rolled them back. A majority have seen that their overall revenue actually shrank. It's a tough thing to do. I don't think people really understand. You have to hire an army of assessors and adjusters to go dig through people's lives and figure out how to value their paintings and their cars and their stock. And it's a very unworkable thing. And I believe in being honest with people. Should we tax billionaires more? Yes. Should we close loopholes? Absolutely. California has a progressive tax structure, and I'm proud of that. We should extend the millionaire's tax. But this tax it's another one of these easy answers politicians give and groups give that don't work in practice. And the dirty secret is, it won't be the billionaires who pay, it'll be the rest of us who are still here in California. It'll be the middle class that's forced to pay for infrastructure and public services, which is why I can't support it.
You are the mayor of San Jose, the capital of Silicon Valley, the largest city in Northern California. Are you already hearing people are leaving, or what has the dialogue been like in that sense?
Well, people are concerned, including just folks who work at tech companies that are actually growing in other places, choosing to open their next office in Austin or Miami or Boulder or other states that are a little bit less regulated, a little more business friendly. We're seeing that migration, but you don't have to take my word for it. The data's clear. Over $1 trillion worth of wealth has left the state. The independent legislative analyst office has already said future revenues are lower. At some point, the bottom line is we have to make government better, not always bigger. There is a lot of waste in government. We're a very heavily regulated state. We have one of the highest tax burdens, one of the most progressive tax codes. Could it be a little more progressive? Sure. But at some point, we also have to look at how we're spending the $350 billion in this proposed budget, which I'll just note is 75% higher than just 6 years ago. Has anything gotten 75% better in the last 6 years? Not anything I'm aware of. And look, we're spending a lot more. And I just think at some point, the focus needs to be on, as I've done as mayor of San Jose, the performance of our programs, the effectiveness of our spending, and the results we're delivering. We shouldn't see revenue and spending go up 75% and actually see housing affordability get worse, energy affordability get worse. Other states like Mississippi shoot past us in terms of literacy rates. Let's focus on the outcomes and be more transparent and accountable about how we're using people's dollars to make their lives better.
And I guess on that point, you are one of the, I think probably the only Democrat in this race talking in those sorts of terms about potential waste, maybe fraud within state spending. I guess, why do you feel like it's important for Democrats to be having that conversation more now?
It's a great question, Dustin, because we should not allow Republicans to own government accountability, efficiency, being smart with your tax dollars. That's a huge political mistake, but also just practically. In San Jose, we reduced the number of people living outside in tents by about 1/3 by being more accountable and committed to that outcome and examining every dollar we were spending. I'll give you a simple example, and it's, there's a lot made of fraud, and there is fraud. We know that there were fraudulent unemployment claims. There's some investigation now of potentially fraudulent hospice claims. Those things should be rooted out. There should be accountability. But I think by an order of magnitude or two, what we really have is spending that is sometimes wasteful or inefficient, where we keep doubling down on spending dollars in ways that aren't really moving the needle for people. And I'll just give you an example on homelessness. We were spending $100 million a year on homelessness, and a big line item was outreach. We had a lot of people going around our city with clipboards offering people resources, which actually was just a pamphlet because we didn't have anything else to offer them. And I had to ask myself, and my council and the public, why are we paying 45 people to go do outreach when actually we need to divert some of that money to offering people a real alternative to the streets? So we've put more money into transitional housing, case management, the things people need to turn their lives around. So now the 10 outreach workers who we brought in-house into our housing department actually have something real to offer people. That's the kind of focus on details and performance that we need in government, because sometimes we just keep doing things because we always have, and we just add another 5% spending on programs that aren't really working. And we deserve better in a place that's already very expensive with a very high tax rate.
I guess you talked about that, the homelessness example, but are there other areas that jump out to you in the state budget where you think there's potentially not efficient spending?
Oh, I think there are so many. I mean, we know in healthcare spending in the state, about 30% of the cost is in administrative overhead. It's billing, it's medical records, it's back office, it's fighting with insurance companies. They're just bringing greater price transparency, using emerging technologies to make more efficient the way that we manage data and information in the medical system. There's a lot we can do to start to bend the cost curve. I don't want to pretend that suddenly we're just going to have billions of dollars, but we can slow the rate of cost expansion. Or take teacher training. We spend billions on teacher training that most teachers will tell you, I can tell you as a former public school teacher, is not particularly effective. And it's in a lot of different buckets. And there are a lot of different stakeholders and constituencies that protect that type of training. We need to look holistically at it and maybe reprogram the entire way we do teacher training and preparation in California. So yeah, are we getting the value for our dollars we should? I would have to say in most areas we're not right now.
What about high-speed rail? That's a favorite target of the Trump administration and a lot of Republicans. Do you think high-speed rail has been wasteful?
Well, I think it, as Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson so well articulated, it's representative of what has gone wrong in our state. We should be able to have high-speed rail. The truth is, in the period of time that we have been pursuing this project, about 16 years, we've spent $15 billion, and we still haven't delivered high-speed rail. In that period of time, China, and it's not necessarily a fair comparison, so I'll give you others, but China has built 23,000 miles of high-speed rail and connected all of their major cities. They just went and did it. Now, it's an authoritarian top-down regime, but it's worth noting, Western European countries build a lot of rail, and they build it at half the cost per mile that we do. And we have created an incredibly inefficient system of consultants and lawyers, and anybody can sue and anybody can block it. And we believe in democracy and individual rights and freedom, but at some point, if it gets too imbalanced, we can't have nice things. We can't upgrade our energy grid. We can't build high-speed rail. We can't build the housing we need. We need a rebalancing. The regulatory environment in California has become outdated. It's become ossified. We've layered more and more rules and process. And it's time to overhaul CEQA, our Environmental Quality Act, and make it simpler to build the things we need to build while still protecting our beautiful open space and ensuring that we keep our air and water clean. These things don't have to be zero sum. They're not mutually exclusive, but we've gotten a little out of whack in California, and it's making it harder for us to invest in shared prosperity.
Let's pivot here and talk about the situation with ICE and immigration at the national level, but also how the state responds to that. One thing a lot of people I think don't know about you on a statewide level is some of the work that you did in San Jose related to ICE and local protections. What are some of the things you accomplished there that you think you would want to take statewide as governor?
Yeah, well, let me start by saying this issue is important to me on a very personal level, having grown up in a small farming town. You mentioned in your intro, I grew up in Watsonville, where your strawberries come from. And I will never forget, as a kid, my mom driving my little sisters and me to school. And it would be dark and cold outside, and we'd be in the car, and the sun would just start coming up over the Pajaro Valley, and there would already be dozens of people out in the fields, stooped over, picking strawberries, fixing irrigation lines, doing back-breaking work in the dark and the cold to put food on our tables. And I grew up with folks who just came here for a better life. About a third of my hometown at one point at least was undocumented. folks who are working hard, contributing, providing essential services, paying taxes, raising children here who are American citizens. And the fact that Donald Trump has chosen to demonize some of the most vulnerable, hardest working members of our community as a way to score cheap political points and divide us is despicable. Now, should we have a secure border? Yes, most Americans agree with that. We've got to move this country forward. But the way to fight this administration is to use every tool at our disposal. And in San Jose, we've sued the Trump administration a number of times. We've created rules and restrictions on how ICE and other law enforcement can operate in our city, including a mask ban for any law enforcement, restrictions on use of city facilities, banning ICE from using them for their operations. We've funded legal services for our immigrant neighbors. San Jose is over 40% foreign-born, so we know the importance of welcoming and protecting all of our residents. But we also have to use the bully pulpit. We have to tell stories that humanize our neighbors and get other Americans who may be supporting this president to realize the harm that's being done and to say we're better than this. And I'll also just say, at the end of the day, the best resistance is delivering results. And when California is thriving, when we're welcoming, when we're creating upward mobility, when we're growing and succeeding and solving our problems, we take a lot of the oxygen out of this MAGA movement that likes to point to our failures as an excuse for authoritarianism. And I'm committed to fighting for our values with every tool we have and fixing our problems so we are leading the way and inspiring the rest of the country to want to be like California.
One of the policies you mentioned is prohibiting ICE from using city facilities or property or seizing that property for their operations. We've seen that in places like Chicago and New Orleans, where ICE is literally commandeering, city property to do some of the raids that they've been and the sweeps they've been doing. Is that the sort of policy you'd want to see taken statewide?
Yes, and while the objection some will have is, well, you can't, the federal government supersedes local control. You can't tell them what to do. The point is, we are creating a durable legal basis for suing this administration, and there are grounds for us as a city, for example, or as a state to say, the taxpayers of this jurisdiction have paid for this facility for this purpose that you are now preventing us from using. And so we're creating a legal basis for pushing back on government overreach in a way that even I think this Supreme Court might have a hard time denying. And so we're trying to get creative and use every tool at our disposal to fight for our values, protect our people, and just really push back on this abuse of power.
And so effectively what you're talking about is asserting a state property right that
That's right.
They cannot seize those sorts of assets. Okay.
That's right.
Let's talk about how Governor Newsom has approached this Trump resistance and this relationship. He's, especially in the last year, has really embraced this kind of more combative persona, and on social media, he's often trolling the president with memes and other things. How would your approach be similar or different to the way Governor Newsom has messaged on that Trump resistance idea?
Yeah, I mean, look, I understand and on some level appreciate what Governor Newsom's doing. He's holding a mirror up to someone who does not represent our values and should be forced to confront the absurdity and, frankly, in many cases, the cruelty of his policies. So that's important, and I value that. I also believe, as I was just saying, that we have to get our house in order. We can't lead the way with moral clarity and as a place that's aspirational and that inspires the rest of the country when we have over 100,000 people in our state living outside in misery. And we have thousands of people who are dying of overdose in our streets. When working families are leaving often for red states because they can't afford the rent. Or when states like Mississippi and Louisiana shoot past us in literacy rates and math proficiency. So I think the answer isn't either or. We have to fight for our values, and Governor Newsom is pursuing a national discussion and debate that I will support him with because I agree with him. But I think the job of mayors and governors is first and foremost to make sure we are using your tax dollars to provide the services that you need to have opportunity and to make your life better here at home. And in the long run, that's the most powerful antidote to this MAGA movement.
And how would you approach the social media piece of this? Would you continue the trolling, or would your style be a little different?
My style is a little different. Look, I will absolutely use the bully pulpit, which includes social media, so importantly these days, to call out Trump's abuses, to push back, to tell the stories of the negative impacts he's having, because that's an important part of the political dialogue. But I think probably fewer memes in a Mahan administration. I'm just really focused on the mechanics of making government deliver results in people's daily lives. And it's not either or, but I also think there are places where we've got to figure out how to make it a win for this federal administration to help us do a few things, quite a few things. I was just down in Los Angeles. I walked through Altadena, the Palisades. There's $40 billion of FEMA money out there being withheld, largely over this personality clash. And if Mayor Mamdani can go down to D.C. and figure out how to get the Trump administration to help New York on a few things, I'm going to find a way to make sure we rebuild LA and we build infrastructure. And there have to be some win-wins that we can find with some of these federal departments and with the White House so that we can make life better for Californians. At the end of the day, I'm not an either or kind of guy. I want to pragmatically find ways to move us forward and make life better for people, because that's all that our politics ought to be about. That is literally the purpose of government, is a vehicle for collective action, for creating more opportunity for people.
Do you think if you went to the Oval Office like Mayor Mamdani has done, do you think you might be able to broker somewhat of a better relationship with him, just as a new governor, a fresh face?
One would hope. Who knows? That's a totally unpredictable thing. I have no idea. I've been a pretty strong critic of the president, but I do try to make my criticisms of whether it's Donald Trump or members of my own party, I try to always make it substantive and rooted in what are we really talking about here? How are we making people's lives better? I've disagreed with our governor, but on some policy issues. And we should expect that from our politics. We shouldn't expect, this is part of my fear with our politics. It's a bad sign if we're falling into partisan and tribal silos to the point where we're always agreeing in everything we think. We all think the same way, and everything we think is right. And everything they think is wrong. That's dangerous. That is how you lose a democracy. And so we're going to have to bring a little more nuance and give and take into this, as hard as it is with the guy we've got in the White House who doesn't see the world that way.
Well, since you brought it up, your relationship with Governor Newsom, you have been critical of him on some policy issues in the past, and also some stylistic things like his social media approach at times. But I guess the biggest policy disagreement has been on homelessness and drug policy, and especially you were a big supporter of Proposition 36, the ballot measure to increase some penalties for drug and theft-related offenses. I guess, how is your relationship now with the governor, and do you feel like it's evolved from some of those past disagreements you have?
I would like to think so. Look, I think Governor Newsom has done a number of important things for our state. He has pushed hard to open up the housing market and make it easier to build the housing we need, most recently signing a very important piece of legislation that starts to reform CEQA, and I think is a great step forward. He's used the housing element to hold cities accountable for saying yes to housing that we need to have a growing middle class. He and I stood together on Proposition 1, which will deliver 10,000 treatment beds. He saw, I think, the challenges of homelessness and addiction and brought forward solutions like Care Court and supported SB 43. So there's been a lot of alignment. Of course, none of that makes the paper. What makes the paper are the times that I've publicly disagreed. And Proposition 36 is a great example of this. And again, we should expect adults who are free-thinking, even members of the same party and allies, to be able to disagree on policy solutions and have an open public debate. I have a different set of experiences, or a different perspective at least, on how to address some of the issues we've seen related to addiction, retail theft, homelessness, And look, the good news is in San Jose, we've proven that when we build safe, dignified, transitional housing, we can get most people indoors. We've led the state in moving thousands of people indoors. But I also know, and I have personal experience with a family member of mine who spent time on the streets with addiction, who was very resistant to help, that when people are deep in the throes of addiction, co-occurring mental illnesses, the humane thing to do is to intervene and get them into a safe place. That doesn't mean locking somebody up and throwing away the key. It doesn't mean forcing medication. But when someone's repeatedly refusing to even come indoors, that is a sign, that's a cry for help. And I just want to see us act with more urgency, with even more intentionality around getting everyone indoors. It is a terrible moral failing that we have had 50,000 people die on our streets over the last decade. And when someone's repeatedly refusing help, that is the sign that they actually most need the help and can't make the decision. We've got to get people into safe shelter, into treatment, an opportunity to detox. And if their addiction is so serious, not only are they refusing help, but they're harming others, that's not fair to the broader community. What do you say to the small business owner who's shutting down and doesn't have a livelihood, or to the kids who can't play in the playground because of rampant drug use? That's not fair, and that erodes and undermines trust in government, trust in the Democratic Party. We've got to do better and really pair compassion with accountability to solve this problem.
I want to get into homelessness a little bit more, but we'll do that a little later. There's a few more political questions I want to get to first, of course. Let's talk about the state of this race and where you fit into the field. Your campaign has a poll out today showing you jumping up to 8%. So you're the closest Democrat potentially in striking distance of Tom Steyer and Katie Porter, who have been the leaders in the Democratic field, especially now with Eric Swalwell out. What is your path in the weeks before ballots start dropping in early May? How do you go from 8% to getting ahead of those two?
Yeah, I'm really excited. We're putting out our first ad today, so we'll be up on air, and I'm just starting to introduce myself to Californians. Some of my opponents in this race have been in politics for a long time. A couple had run for president, one's run for state senate. Many have been on television for many years. And the exciting thing about this race is just having an opportunity to go around the state and share with people who I am, what motivates me, what my core values are, and what we've done in San Jose, which is the best testament to my governing philosophy. It's the best indicator of how I will lead as governor. We haven't promised people unrealistic things that we can't deliver on and can't afford. We haven't given people the easy answer. We've tried to give people real answers. We've set public goals and increased transparency about how we spend money. We've admitted failure in public when things we've been funding haven't worked. We've said we have to try something else. And by being more transparent and more accountable, we have really moved the needle. We've led the state on some very important issues. We've reduced crime by over 20% and made San Jose the safest big city in the country, the only big city in the country to solve 100% of homicides 4 years running. And I think in Chicago, it's maybe 60%. We have, as I mentioned earlier, moved thousands of people indoors into safe, dignified, transitional housing and reduced the number of people living in tents by about 1/3. We have unblocked housing production and gotten thousands of homes under construction. And we've done all of that and balanced our budget without raising taxes, without that reflexive thing we always see in California of, oh, you want to solve a problem? Let's put another tax on the ballot. At some point, we've got to be more accountable and effective with all of the resources we have. And that's what we've been doing in San Jose. And you know what the best part is? Over the last few years, as we've done that, trust in City Hall, as measured in our annual community survey, we do an independent scientific poll, has gone up about 40%. Because people are seeing the change, and it's renewing their faith that their government can actually solve the problems that matter in their lives. And that's why I'm in this race. I want to make state government and all of our counties and cities and school districts as effective as they can possibly be, and that takes leadership from the top.
Those other two, Tom Steyer, Katie Porter, they've been in a bit of a contest recently to basically brand themselves as the most progressive Democrat in the race. And Steyer's even calling himself the progressive in the race. But you're not doing that. I mean, how do you feel like your ideology is different from those two in terms of progressive, moderate? What do you see as the distinction?
My ideology is getting stuff done for people. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about how to label my ideology. I actually think that's part of what's wrong with our political culture. I have a number of goals. I would say most of my goals are what you might call progressive. I want everybody to be able to afford housing and high quality health care. I want every child in our state to get an excellent education and have a lot of hope and opportunity in their lives. I want our neighborhoods to be safe and clean and have high quality infrastructure, public transit and parks and other services that people rely on. I know how important that is because our public library was our after school program growing up because my parents both worked long hours. But I also believe in pragmatic means. It's one thing to talk about all of these ideas or give simple answers. We'll just keep raising taxes, or we'll make everything free, or if Trump would say, get rid of all the immigrants. I mean, these are not real answers. And so my ideology is finding what works and being honest with people about what we can and can't do and fighting every day to make life a little bit better for people.
And what do you think most distinguishes you from Steyer and Porter, if the three of you are the most likely Democrats to emerge from the primary?
Well, I'm the only candidate in this race with deep executive experience and a track record of delivering real results in people's lives. Even before I was in an executive role as a public school teacher, I held myself accountable for getting each of my students on grade level. And I told them that if they work hard, they can accomplish anything, which is my motivation to this day, to make good on that promise for them and every Californian. In small biz, I ran a small business and we built tools for civic engagement. And I had to go to my board of directors every 90 days and show whether or not we were growing, serving customers, people were using the tools, and there was accountability. And as mayor, as I've mentioned, we've dramatically reduced crime and homelessness and built housing and balanced our budget and done hard things. And I know what it takes to make those tough choices, to make hard trade-offs, to be direct with people about what we can and can't do. And I find that, the rest of this field, frankly, is talking a lot of talk, promising a lot of things that I think maybe even they know they can't deliver. I'm focused on delivery, on actual results that touch people's lives and make them better. And I think that's the most important differentiation imaginable.
To be devil's advocate here, one of the biggest critiques from these opponents of you, especially from Tom Steyer, has been who some of your donors are, that, you include some wealthy tech folks, some billionaires, some folks that they might argue have been favorable to the President Trump at times. How do you respond to that critique that people say that you're too close to tech or too close to some of the billionaire class?
Well, Dustin, I mean, first of all, I grew up in a working class community, small farming town. We were paycheck to paycheck. I know what it means to have public services work well and create opportunity and quality of life for people. And I know the stakes when they don't. And I'm running for the people living in neighborhoods like the one I grew up in. I lead a big city in the heart of Silicon Valley. And I think people from the Valley are excited about my campaign because they've seen how much change we've created in San Jose. They see that we're starting to see small businesses open up again, that we've got some cranes going up in the air because we're building housing again, that we've led the state in reducing crime and reducing homelessness. Those are the kinds of results that people want to see. But I'm not running for any particular industry or interest group, quite the opposite. I ran for mayor against the establishment and didn't have the special interest backing. I didn't have the endorsements. I was outspent by millions of dollars. I'm very much the underdog in this race. I don't think there's any, Sacramento insiders or groups that want to see me be governor, and that's okay. I don't mind that. I'm going around the state introducing myself to people, talking about what it will take to make our government deliver better results for people and improve their daily lives. And I'm not interested in substituting one special interest for another. What we need in our government today is real accountability for the outcomes and being able to say to our friends, say no, to push back on the narrow interests for the good of the people of California. And look, tech is very powerful. These new tools can make life better. We've used them to speed up public buses in San Jose, improve language translation, solve all kinds of problems, again, without having to raise taxes. So that's good. But fears of job loss are very real, which is why we've created AI upskilling curriculum, and we've pushed tech companies to bring their tools into our public library system and make them free and do training. We've regulated, I think I'm the only candidate in this race that has used these tools to improve public services and also regulated their use. We don't allow technology in San Jose that uses facial recognition. We don't share data with third parties, including the federal government, because it could be abused. We don't store data that could be abused. We delete it routinely. So I know what these tools offer in terms of their power for good and the risk of harm. I think it would be useful to have a governor who knows enough about this industry and these tools to understand that difference and be able to effectively regulate them without just pushing them all to Austin or letting China have the upper hand in innovation. And I know how to do that, and I'm committed to doing that as governor.
You were in the Politico Bureau in Sacramento recently, and you did an interview with us, and this is one of the topics that came up. And one thing you said that really kind of jumped out to me is you said that tech really hasn't been that engaged as a political force in state politics here in California. And so in that vein, I'm curious, do you feel like the Democratic Party has a role to play in just being sort of, more open-minded to tech as a player in politics and policy here?
Well, you are seeing the text. Historically, Silicon Valley just wanted to be left alone and was not very politically engaged. You've seen a lot of tech investment in federal races in recent years, not for the better. In state government, I think until recently, much of tech wasn't really paying attention or now are starting to engage. And this is an important trend because these companies are very powerful. They have a lot of resources, and we need leaders who understand how these tools work and how to make sure that we're properly creating guardrails and protecting people without killing the innovation that has been a hallmark of our state, not just in tech, but innovation in culture in Hollywood, in agriculture, in manufacturing. And I think the Democratic Party is going to have to evolve to meet this new moment, which is we have an impulse to always tax and regulate, but we have to be nuanced in how we do it. Because if we stop being able to build or we push all of the innovation out of our state, we're going to all lose. We're going to be worse off for it. And so the party's going to have to evolve in figuring out the right balance. Autonomous vehicles being a really interesting example. They're so much safer on average than human drivers. But, dramatically, we'll save thousands and thousands of lives from more autonomous vehicles. On the other hand, they're not perfect, and that's why they need to be heavily scrutinized and regulated, as they are. But some have proposed, including some of my opponents in this race, who are trying to outposition themselves further and further left, that we should just mandate that there always be a human in the vehicle. Well, that kind of defeats the purpose of it being an autonomous vehicle. And at some point, if we go that far, we're just going to stagnate and lose our edge. It's, Detroit didn't think it was going to be Detroit until it became Detroit. Now it's finally rebounding, thank God, and it's a great city. But at some point, you can kill the golden goose. And so we've got to strike the right balance.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, I promised you we'd get back to homelessness, so let's get there. As mayor, San Jose has seen about homelessness drop by about a third during your tenure. What sort of successes from that work do you see that you want to scale at a state level?
Yeah, it's a really important question. There are a few things I would highlight without going too deep into the policy weeds. Number one is prevention is really important. It is so much more cost-effective and humane to keep people stably housed than allow their lives to unravel and have them end up on the streets. In fact, it costs about $60,000 per person per year just to manage the impacts of unsheltered homelessness. We can stably house someone in a secure private location with case management, meals, access to services for half of that cost. But we can prevent someone from even becoming homeless for about a third of that cost, for about $10,000. And San Jose, in partnership with Santa Clara County, has designed the nation's best prevention system. I would like to scale that up statewide. Number two, the importance of transitional housing is something that can't be overstated. Having a safe place for someone to immediately go if they do become homeless is just so much better and more effective than allowing them to end up in a tent encampment. It's not true that most people become homeless because of addiction. But once you've been out in the conditions on the streets for months, in some cases years, that's a lot more likely to be something that keeps you trapped there. So we need to immediately be able to stabilize people. And that's what we've done in San Jose, is expand transitional housing, stabilize people, connect them to supportive services. And then third and finally, to really solve this problem in the long run, we have to build more housing. And we can be smart about it. We should be building up in our downtowns and near transit. And I know the concerns about just building indiscriminately everywhere. I don't want to see our hillsides get built up, and because of fire risk, they shouldn't be, and earthquake risk. But we have to say yes to housing. We have to make room for future generations, or we're creating impossible conditions, and then we're just treating symptoms. And actually, I said third and finally, but we do need to expand and improve the quality of our mental health care in the state, and addiction treatment in particular, and that's a whole other topic. But there are solutions. I guess that's the bottom line. There are things we know to do to solve this, and there's no excuse for over 100,000 people living outside in tents in our state, and that will not be the case. If I become governor, we will dramatically bring down the number of people living outside.
One piece of your plan in San Jose that got a lot of attention was the responsibility to shelter ordinance. And this is an ordinance, for people that don't know about it, where there's an option for someone to be potentially face arrest if they at least 3 times refuse an offer of shelter from police. I guess, how are you thinking about that sort of approach at a statewide level? If I understand you right from our past conversations, that would not be the first thing you would want to do at a state level, but it might be an option down the road. Is that right?
Yeah, and here's the good news. We've not jailed anyone under this policy, but what we can do is petition to get people into a drug court or a mental health court, which is the point. Look, I wouldn't start there, because it doesn't do you any good to use the tools of the law to demand that someone come indoors or speak to a counselor or get some help if you don't have help to offer them. Which is why in San Jose, I focused exclusively, when it comes to this issue, on expanding the supply of safe, dignified places to go and services, to give people real alternatives that worked. We went from 5 years ago, 0 transitional housing. My predecessor started, Sam Liccardo, now a Congress member representing us in the South Bay, started this, and we've scaled it. And we've built 23 transitional housing sites, thousands of units with case management and services. I do think, though, that for the good of people who are outside, often with serious behavioral health issues, for the good of the community, for trusting government and the viability of our politics here, when we're asking people to spend tens of millions of dollars to provide safe, dignified, private places to go, where you can bring your pet, your possessions, there's not strict sobriety requirements. We're giving you a real alternative. At some point, you can't choose to camp in a park next to a playground and make it something that the families of the neighborhood can't use. That's just not workable. And so what we've done with responsibility to shelter is, I think it's been misunderstood and maybe twisted in part by political opponents who want to tell a different story, is being able to cite someone for repeatedly refusing shelter when there's an alternative is the legal tool we need to be able to petition to get them into a drug court, get them into a mental health court, and allow a judge to mandate the help that they need. I don't think it's workable to allow people to simply camp in public spaces and decide when they're ready to come indoors. I don't, especially if you're asking people to spend millions of their hard-earned tax dollars to offer dignified alternatives.
What does that look like on the state level? I mean, you talked about in a lot of places there might not be alternatives, and it's a tough thing to have this option on the table. But down the road, you would pursue that sort of a potential state policy?
Well, I think the way I think about it is that the state is the quarterback, and the state needs to create a framework of what works, taking the best from cities and counties and other parts of the country and the world that have made more progress on this issue than we have, and needs to say, these are the current best practices. Now, they can evolve and change as we learn, but as governor, I will create a statewide fair share framework that gets every city and every county to do its part to address and ultimately end this crisis of unsheltered homelessness. And to do that, we will need cities to build shelter and transitional housing and say yes to affordable housing. We will need counties to build inpatient treatment for addiction and mental health care and to provide services at shelters and interim housing. We'll need both to invest in prevention. And what the state ought to be doing is offering the framework, the playbook, the capacity building, the best practices, and the funding to do those things, and accountability for cities and counties to play their role in every city and county. Because we have a lot of places where the wealthier little town will just kind of push their problem into the next town or the bigger city. And we can't expect a few big cities to solve this problem for the whole state. If the state does that and we get every city and county doing their part, we will see homelessness go down dramatically. But that becomes a point at which one of those best practices is using drug courts and mental health courts to get those hardest to reach, most service-resistant people into shelter, into treatment, into care. But you don't start there. You start with having safe, dignified places and services for people.
You mentioned the experience with your cousin earlier, and you've often talked about that and the mental health and addiction treatment aspect of this. What did you learn? Can you talk a little bit more about what you learned from that example that just is informed the way you think about this issue?
Yeah, I've had more than one personal experience with severe, with friends and family members having quite serious behavioral health issues. It's something we don't talk a lot about mental health, but I think all of us have had our experiences with our own mental health being, better or worse than with loved ones. And look, whether it was my cousin who spent time on the streets with a very serious addiction, or a very dear friend of mine who discovered when we were around 20 years old that he has bipolar disorder, and other cases, folks I know. One of the things I've learned is that when you're in that experience, when you're in the throes of a deep addiction or a serious mental illness, you simply aren't always equipped to make the best or most rational decision about your own self-care. And one of the things I find very sad in our society is those of us who have the support network, the families, the friends who are there to intervene and take charge and make sure you get the help that you need have much better outcomes. And those who don't in our society far too often, particularly in our state, end up out on the streets in a tent encampment and ultimately dying. And that's not right. And I believe that as a community, that we through government, through our vehicle for collective action, have a duty, a responsibility to intervene and get you into a safe place. Yes, there needs to be oversight and protections and clinical expertise, but we've let the pendulum go too far, and I don't think it's any kind of civil liberty to let someone choose to die of overdose down in a creek bed somewhere. I just don't buy that, and I want to rebalance our approach to this issue.
It's just about time for audience questions, but the other piece of this I feel like we got to talk about is housing. That was one of the big pillars you mentioned, but there have been multiple bites at the apple in Sacramento in recent years, many bills that have tried to speed up construction and permitting timelines and zoning restrictions at the local level. But despite all those changes and all those bills, we haven't seen housing production go up dramatically in a lot of places. What do you think really needs to happen to get that type of construction supercharged?
Yeah, the state has taken some meaningful action in recent years, and there's always a lag because we don't control all of the factors. As long as interest rates are high and we have tariffs driving up the cost of materials, there are some factors out of our control that reduce how much housing we will build. But the state has taken on some of the tough issues. I think there's more to do, as I mentioned earlier, around reforming the regulatory environment. I think it's still too slow to get a permit, too easy to sue to stop a project just because you don't like it for some reason or as leverage in a negotiation. So I think some of that work remains to be done. But the big barrier now is really the cost of construction. Because in San Jose, we're a very pro-housing city. We approved over 20,000 new homes, most of which didn't get built because they couldn't get financing because the cost to build is so high. And the way to reduce the cost of housing, I put a whole plan on my website, mahanforcalifornia.com. It's very detailed. It's rooted in the experience I've had as a mayor who has fought to build housing for working and middle-class families. There are a few things that really drive up costs that we can change. In fact, it's crazy that in Colorado, they can build the exact same home for half of the cost in California. And the biggest levers we have are speeding up permitting. If you're bringing forward a project that conforms with a general plan that's already gone through a public process, you ought to be able to get a permit in 30 days. Cities shouldn't be able to impose one-time fees that in some cities add 20% to the cost of housing. There should be caps on how much you can charge in terms of fees. Local regulations and requirements in the building code and other local rules that go far beyond the state. The state already has the most restrictive and comprehensive building codes, environmental laws, fire protections, and then we have localities decide to add, what the heck, we'll add a few dozen more rules on top. And sometimes these just become ways of saying no to housing without actually saying no to housing. And I think the state can step in and say faster permits, more predictable regulatory environment, caps on fees, and even incentivize new building methods like factory-built housing that can be beautiful and high quality and more efficient. These are the things that tackle the cost side so that we can start building housing for the middle class in California again.
All right, I think it's time to go to audience questions. We could use a few more questions, so if you want to raise a question, there's cards, raise your hand, and someone will come to you. And if you're online, you can also add a question in the YouTube chat. Okay, first question here. This person wants to know, is it time to do away with Proposition 13? This is the ballot measure that freezes a lot of property taxes in amber for property owners around the state. What do you think? Is it time to do away with it?
You know, on the one hand, I'm very aware of how unfair and distortionary Prop 13 can be. I will never forget my wife and I buying our first home and talking to our neighbor who it turned out had a property tax bill that was 1/12. I think it was ours, or 1/15 what ours was. And as a young family starting out, just trying to make ends meet, wanting to start a family, it was frustrating to have such a high bill. And it's hard. It's hard. I think it does lock people out of home ownership, which is a problem. The challenge, though, is that California, after Prop 13, when we saw public finances take a dive and we had less revenue, over the next few decades, we found a lot of other ways to increase revenue and make up for it. We actually have become depending on how you measure it, second or third highest tax state in the country. We've got the highest income taxes, the highest sales taxes, the most progressive income taxes. We have a lot of taxes and fees. We've made it very expensive to live here. So any reform has to meet a very high bar. I think it should be revenue neutral. I think it should not displace people and small business, people why do we have Prop 13? Because retirees were on the verge of losing their homes. I've got an opponent in this race who's saying that, we'll just magically raise $30 billion and there'll be no impact. That will get passed on to small businesses, to consumers. That has impacts in our economy in a state that's already very high tax, very expensive. So I haven't seen anyone yet bring forward a reform plan that minimizes the downsides and impacts on retirees, on working families who want to achieve home ownership, on small businesses and consumers. And am I open to a reform that makes it fairer and less distortionary? Of course. But that's a long process of digging through the data, getting stakeholders together, and finding a way to do it that works. And there are a lot of easy answers being offered out there, but I haven't seen a real plan yet. So I'm not ready to sign up for what some folks are proposing. But I do understand the frustration with it and the fact that it has real distortions in our economy.
This question is about the narrative around sanctuary city policies, and I think in the broader political landscape, but also within the Democratic Party. How would you reframe or re-educate people regarding sanctuary city policies to be supportive of citizens versus protecting criminals, which I think is the way Republicans have framed it. But yeah, how would you approach that?
Absolutely. I have a very different perspective on it. As the mayor of the safest big city in the country, I can tell you from direct experience that public safety is built on the foundation of trust between law enforcement officers and the communities they serve. And you do not build trust by trying to round people up and initiate mass deportation or have people living in fear so they can't even go to work or take their kids to schools. We've become the safest big city in the country because we hire from our community and have a department that is reflective of the beautiful diversity of San Jose. Because we do community policing, we build real relationships, we've built trust, we've earned trust. We're not perfect, and when we've had officers violate our rules or break the law, they've been held accountable, but we've built trust with our community, which sounds like a soft thing. Trust, what does that mean? That sounds very amorphous. I will tell you what it means. It means people report crime. It means people provide evidence. It means they serve as witnesses. It means they look out for each other when their neighbor goes out of town. When you build trust, you get safety because everybody participates in the process of creating public safety. So that's the reframing. The Trump administration is making us less safe. Do you want a community where everybody lives in fear, where people don't report crime because they're scared to engage with law enforcement? They don't provide evidence. They won't serve as witnesses. That makes us less safe. It doesn't make any sense at all. And so that's the reframing. We're not providing sanctuary to criminals. Anybody in our community, irrespective of their immigration status, is held accountable for committing crime. You commit property or violent crime, we will hold you accountable in San Jose. We don't need to ask for your immigration status. Just like we don't do the role of the IRS. We don't check your tax returns. Did you file or not? Do you have the right visa? We don't care. If you're in our city and you're abiding by our laws, you're a member of our community. And you should contribute and not live in fear. And if you're in our city and you're breaking the law, you should be held accountable. It's pretty simple, actually.
Okay, let's go to the next question here. This is from one of our viewers online. They're wondering, what role do you think California should play in international affairs with climate, et cetera, and especially as the world's fifth largest economy, would shaping international policy, tech is also data privacy, AI, other areas where we could play a role. Would that be important to you?
Well, we do. There's no question. By nature of being the fourth largest economy in the world, having 40 million people are the most productive and creative people on earth. Some of the leading industries, not just in technology, but in Hollywood and the cultural economy and agriculture, advanced manufacturing, food and beverage and entertainment and tourism. What we do has a ripple effect. So we have a special responsibility to get it right here. And there are places around climate knows no borders. Trade, by definition, we have the biggest ports in the country. Our regulation of tech, the culture we produce, inevitably has an implication and impact on the entire world. And I take that responsibility very seriously. At the same time, my job as governor, should I be so fortunate as to serve in that role, is to make sure that we are making life better for Californians. And I would not expect, certainly not out of the gate, you shouldn't expect to see me doing a lot of international travel. I'll do Zoom. We'll have the conversation about the world. But look, we, right now in this moment, we need someone who is using all of the tools of state government, working with our counties, our cities, our school boards to solve problems in people's daily lives. We need to get all of our kids on grade level for reading and math. We need to make it easier to build housing people can afford. We need to bend the cost curve on energy without abandoning our climate goals. We need to upgrade our infrastructure. We have a lot of work to do here at home. And I firmly believe that we will lead the world and win the fight for our values at a national level by ensuring that California lives up to its full potential, by making it a place that everyone continues to look to for leadership, to see what the future can look like. That's what I want for our state, and that's what I'll focus on doing as governor.
Okay, this person would like to know if you can share more specifics about what guardrails you support to protect against job losses from AI.
Well, it's a great question, and the truth is none of us know how AI is going to play out. And there's a doomsday scenario where everything gets automated very quickly and there's mass unemployment. There are the techno-optimists who think there's nothing to worry about, no problem. And frankly, I think most likely the truth is in the middle. We need to be ready for that doomsday scenario. I mean, look, if we have mass unemployment, we have to think very differently about the safety net. We will need to have a very real conversation about tools like UBI, Universal Basic Income. But right now, given what's right ahead of us and what we can see and how much we can know, which with the pace of technological change is frankly not very far out, there are lessons from history and there are things that we can do today. The number one way to manage technological change is to invest in people. Invest in their skills, their knowledge, their access. That's why in San Jose, I've worked very hard to bring these tools into government. We didn't just impose AI at City Hall and say, here's a bunch of new tools that we're going to automate away your jobs. We did the opposite. We started with partnering with our public university, San Jose State, to create an AI upskilling curriculum to give exposure and some training and orientation to our workers so that they could start to play around with these tools. And we created the guardrails for them to do so safely and responsibly. This year, we'll have 1,000 city workers go through an AI upskilling curriculum where they can start to apply these tools in the workplace to be more productive. And even if they one day choose to leave City Hall, we've given them the gift of having that upskilling and that training that they can take with them anywhere. We've gotten tech companies to bring free tools and training into our libraries, the first city in the country where if you have a library card, as 700,000 people do in San Jose, you can get access to free tools and training from some of the leading, most cutting-edge tech companies. We started something called the GovAI Coalition that now 900 public agencies around the country and really actually around the world use to see how we regulate tech, policy manuals, incident response plans, responsible procurement, a vendor registry, use cases, the collective expansion of our knowledge, our skills. We're going to all have to learn together. One other thing I'll just say, there are a lot of jobs that aren't going to be automated that are going to be in high demand. We have an aging population. We have a lower birth rate. We could ironically end up in a situation where in certain areas we have real labor shortages. Let's get ahead of that. Let's prepare people for healthcare careers, education and childcare careers, construction trades. These are roles that are very unlikely to be automated away, where we need talented young people to enter these professions. There should be career technical pathways going all the way to middle school where I used to be a teacher. Why do we make some of our most creative kids feel like failures because of an overly restrictive curriculum? People think and learn in a lot of different ways, and we should create pathways for everyone to be successful, not just in our education system, but in our society.
Okay, we're just about out of time, so this will have to be our last question. And this is on the subject of trial lawyers, tort reform, and lawsuits affecting public governments. This person's concerned about public school districts that are paying billions in record legal settlements and teetering on the brink of insolvency. What are your views on tort reform? This is also a big issue with rideshare companies. A lot of industries being affected by these types of settlements. Yeah, how would you approach the issue?
Yeah, I am concerned, and there's quite a bit of research on this. The cost of our current regulatory and legal environment in California, just tort cost each year now exceeds $5,000 per household in California. And we, by most measures, lead the nation in that cost. So I talk a lot about pragmatism and balance. Tort law is there for a reason. We have to protect consumers, protect workers. It's important that bad actors are held accountable. But I think we can all agree that when you mentioned school districts, I recently spoke with someone at a city level, a mayor, who said that the latest settlement for a trip and fall case was so expensive that now they can't afford to repair any of the other sidewalks in the city. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't lead us to a good place. And so I do think we have to have a look at the regulatory environment and what guardrails, we talk about guardrails, what guardrails are in place around who has standing to sue, the length of time for judicial review, whether or not there's an opportunity for some kind of mediation or arbitration, caps on settlements. I mean, look, these are things we have to talk about. I don't know exactly what the right answer is. None of us do. The process of governance is getting together all of the affected parties and weighing the different interests and trying to find a pragmatic path forward. But I can tell you right now, the cost of tort law in California is extremely great. It's driving up insurance costs. It's driving small businesses out of business. And we're at a point where the lack of balance is really harming Californians. And we need to rebalance to protect people, have a growing economy again, and enable our public systems, whether it's schools or cities, to provide essential services. So this will be a very important task for our next governor.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Matt Mahan, for a great discussion. And if you want more information on future Commonwealth Club events, including the ongoing series of forums with the candidates for governor, you can visit commonwealthclub.org. I'm Dustin Gardner. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you all so much.
Hey, thank you. That was great.
Thank you.